Thank you for joining us at the historic opening weekend of 100 Acres, the Virginia Beach Fairbanks Art and Nature Park. We have a great program in store for you and a great sense behind the scenes of all the ways in which these extraordinary projects came to pass. There are so many donors who made this extravagant experiment possible. I want to highlight particularly the Richard M. Fairbanks Foundation for their remarkable gift of $11 million to provide an operating endowment for this park, for those of you who wondered if this was going to last. There's no question about that. I also want to thank the Hagerman Group as a contractor that really also put in their time and effort far beyond the call of duty and that of a typical contractor relationship. The weather, you may have noticed, got in the way of productivity a few times, but our plan is that when you're out in the park tonight, tomorrow, you won't notice any of that. All you'll see is the glory that both artists and nature have wrought. There's one person who was critical behind the scenes and in front of the scenes for many years to get us to this point, and that's the Ruth Lilly Deputy Director of Environmental and Historic Preservation, Mark Zalonis, and I want to single Mark out for my thanks as well. So now, I want to introduce, by way of a vlog, our master of ceremonies for today's programming. So if you will please, I used to say roll tape, roll YouTube.
Good morning, Hank. It's Wednesday. Check out the canals right here in Indianapolis. We are the Amsterdam of central Indiana. So, Hank, today the Yeti and I are out at 100 Acres, the art and nature park that the Indianapolis Museum of Art is opening this weekend, which is the culmination of years and years of work by lots of people, including the Yeti. So, Hank, since you and Mom and Dad can't be here, I thought I would give you a tour. So, Hank, I don't think you know this, but my new book is about an island, and I've been doing a lot of reading about islands, and one of my favorite projects here in the 100 Acres Park is this awesome tiny little island by Andrea Zittel called Indianapolis Island. So the crazy thing about that island, Hank, is that even though it is tiny and you can just barely stand up in it, 2 people are living there all summer. They've got a garden growing that extends out into the water, and it's a fascinating experiment in how little we need in order to live. There's lots of cool trails where you forget you live in Indianapolis and you can pretend that you live in, I don't know, Missoula. This is Eden 2, a 50-foot refugee ship created by the artist Tea Makipa. You know Tea Makipa, Hank. She did TV for chickens. This is pretty awesome to have this weird dislocated refugee ship sitting on a lake in Indianapolis. Cute boots are cute. This is one of Joep van Lieshout's roller coaster benches, the only roller coaster I will ever ride. So Sarah, tell me about this piece here, this green structure that looks almost like a TARDIS.
Now this project is a temporary intervention into the landscape that will really only be here for a few days, and its point is to remind us of our humanity.
This project is by the artist collective Type A. Those 2 rings create a single shadow exactly 1 day a year, the summer solstice. We are almost there. As you can see, Hank, I am not the only media covering this event. Here we have Free Basket by the Cuban artist duo Los Carpinteros.
Hank, what I love about Free Basket is that you can actually play on it, provided you're, willing to invent a new game like we used to when we were kids. It's like a lot of the work in the park. It forces us to think more complexly about the shapes and spaces that we often just look over, whether it's benches or islands or basketball courts. Which, by the way, Hank, is why I think people often dismiss contemporary art, overlooking things is comfortable, but I would argue that failing to grapple with complexity actually turns out to be a pretty bad life strategy, which is why I like good art so much. So I think it's really good, Sarah.
Thanks.
My only complaint, and please don't take this personally, is that you didn't dome it in, so there's no climate control. It's hot. Hank, there's a ton of other stuff happening at 100 Acres, more info in the doobly-doo, but I'm not going to tell you about it because I have to go watch South Africa play Uruguay. I will see you on Friday.
Ladies and gentlemen, John Green.
Hi. I am your totally unqualified master of ceremonies. I feel like I should briefly explain some of the jokes in that video that don't make any sense to 99% of you. I make videos with my brother Hank on YouTube. When I was pointing at the doobly-doo, I was not pointing at my pants, although it appeared that way. I was pointing at the video description that is on YouTube. YouTube videos decontextualized make very little sense. And the Yeti is my wife, the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art here, Sarah Urist Green, who is called the Yeti because even though my brother and I have been making videos for 4 years, she has never appeared in one of those videos due to her sort of generalized embarrassment about the fact that I do that for a living, which has, of course, reached its pinnacle at this very moment. I am very glad to be here, although, as previously mentioned, unqualified, and I could not be happier to share with you in the opening of this extraordinary park, which is a wonderful thing for our city, a wonderful thing for our community, and an extraordinary moment in the history of this museum. I am here for two reasons. The first is that I make those video blogs on the internet, and the second is blatant nepotism of being married to Sarah, who is a curator here. But there is a coincidental reason that I am also qualified to do this job, which is that I have a pathological neurosis about punctuality, which is good because I'm going to help us stay punctual today. And ergo, I will now introduce Lisa Freiman. Lisa is the Curator of Contemporary Art here at the IMA. She's also the director of the 100 Acres Virginia B Fairbanks Art and Nature Park, and it is my great pleasure to introduce her.
Good morning. It's amazing to be here and see all of you here and to have all of the projects completed on time and on budget. It's extraordinary. I had the amazing honor to work with 8 artists and artist collectives on making this project a reality, as well as an extraordinary architect and landscape architect. 2 of the artists, Adam Ames and Andrew Bordwin, I worked with particularly closely doing a real-time experiential art program project on team building that took place with many participants from the IMA staff over a 2-year period and culminated in their creation of Team Building Align. I'm going to show a clip of the 2 of them, and then we'll be in discussion together. They wanted to team build the staff that was going to be developing the 100 Acres project.
We had to get all of these people to buy into what we were doing, and not just as being team built, but as being team built as part of an art project.
The high course is an ingenious thing because it's constructed to introduce a level of consequence and intensity and single-minded focus. Even though you know how safe you are, your animal nature takes over when you're physically 45 feet in the air and you're walking out on something that you could fall off of at any second. And it forces you to live in the moment.
We have trees, we have the ground, we have grass, hell, we have the sun. You know, we have all these things that are part of a nature park. We went to just basic forms.
They were going to hang these 2 huge metal rings that were roughly the size of the groups when we circled up.
The first ring is up high, it's 27 feet above ground. Then you have the second ring, and what's going to happen is the sunlight's going to be coming in from an angle on June 21st, roughly about 74 degrees in altitude. That shadow will line up with the second shadow, and you'll get one single ring. So it will be perfect alignment for roughly 20-30 minutes during that time, give or take a week, around just June 21st.
That repeated act that happens on an annual basis really becomes the metaphor for this very complex process of experience that we all have. Please join me in welcoming Type A. Can you hear us?
Hello.
Awesome. Well, we thought today that we would focus our 10 minutes that we have with you on a crucial moment of the project when essentially this interdisciplinary, interdepartmental group of IMA staff members ranging from custodial to night watchmen to retail salespeople to curators and conservators were working with Adam and Andrew on this project, and they had been doing these team building retreats for about a year and a half, and Adam and Andrew had come into the project, and I don't know if we could flip to the image of the towers, but they came into the project with this idea that they were going to do this giant, massive, monumental sculpture that was relatively phallic and would be suspended in the air. And essentially, the team rebelled against them and said that they really couldn't have this project in the sculpture park because it wouldn't hold up to the experiential work that we'd been doing together, and that the process of the experiential team building and the resolution of the final sculpture needed to be connected. And so here we had people literally, custodians and night watchmen and various other folks who were critiquing the artists and giving them a pretty hard time about their aesthetic premise. And much to Adam and Andrew's credit, they listened. And so I wanted to ask you guys if you could talk a little bit about your experience, sort of expanding your focus on collaboration and competition, which you usually focus just on the two of you, and how you opened up your practice and changed your practice as a result of the work that you did here with Team Building Align.
I'll handle this one.
Thank you.
First thing, I just wanted to correct one thing you said about the sculpture. That you said it was relatively phallic, and it wasn't true. It was entirely phallic.
Extremely.
So, let's see.
Kind of the whole point.
Yeah, I mean, we started out just over 12 years ago, the two of us, and that was one level of collaboration. We would consistently go back and forth, giving each other, either offering ideas, describing ideas, pushing each other to try things and explore things that up to that point might have just been something one of us wanted to do. But we did approach that collaboration as competitive. And over the years, we realized that competition, that aggression, served us very well and actually created a lot of energy and a lot of work. And at some point, it became clear that within that competition in the collaboration, there was also a working together. That we were definitely supporting one another. And at a certain point, it seemed to kind of switch, and that support, or I guess what we would call more the collaborative, the supportive collaboration became more of the focal point. Of course, the competition also remained. When we developed the whole team building project, we weren't exactly sure what we were getting into, but I can tell you, tell me if I'm wrong, we started to see things that we hadn't seen before in our own work, and then when working with a larger group, realized that it was important not only to lead with ideas, but to also sit back, let other people's ideas, let other people take center stage. And as artists, it's not exactly a typical model for artists.
So are you saying you relinquished some control?
Can you believe it?
Yeah. And we wound up kind of sitting back, and people were talking, and they got so comfortable to the point where there was this pivotal moment about a year and a half in, where the team started to question this tower that we had proposed. And I guess the picture hasn't been up, but this about a 40-foot climbing tower that was suspended about 12 feet off the ground by an external structure. And the basic premise was we had been learning about experiential education and enjoying the fact that it was very direct and that there wasn't a lot of value placed on the experience prior to the experience. The whole point was to have the experience and then you reflect upon it after. We felt that was not only a wonderful model for art, but perhaps for beyond that, for life. And we really started to embrace that. When we came up with the tower was more of a commentary on here is something that you can use, a tower. It's utilitarian. You can use it for a direct experience, but we're going to just put it out of your reach. You're not going to be able to actually use it. And we thought this is a good way to approach a museum that we weren't so familiar with at this point, like we're going to do a cultural or an institutional critique. And at a certain point, it became glaringly obvious that this was not the institution to critique or to do that critique for, because just about everything we had asked to do, as outlandish as some of the stuff was, Lisa, you were incredibly receptive, and the museum as a whole was receptive. We didn't see that as clearly until the group pointed it out to us with the question, the now famous question, does it have to be a tower?
I think a big part of, if I may, a big part of what we have built our practice on is about removing assumptions and releasing assumptions and not having assumptions about anything about the way a piece should be, about what expectations we may have for what a piece will give us. Releasing those assumptions is really important, and that turning point where we walked in, we started the project with a basic idea of what we wanted to do with this group of people from the museum, but we didn't really assume at all how it was going to turn out. We let it be what it wanted to be. The sculpture idea, however, was one big assumption. Looking at it now, was one big assumption, and that we walked in with this idea for a sculpture, and became very clear that we had to let go of that too. So the whole project has been about release to a great extent, and letting go of the sculpture was a big part of that. Letting go of that original idea. When the group said, well, listen, you committed to being responsive, now we're going to ask you to be responsive. And we were. So we changed everything, and it felt a lot better, it felt right.
So can you just talk about, once you made the decision to change, what it was that you came up with, and sort of the aha moment?
Well, one of the things that we learned working, studying and training in experiential education was starting every conversation with the question, what's your goal? And it's a pretty basic, I mean, it's not a magical equation, but it's a really good starting point for just about every sort of turning point where we have to make a decision about how to approach a project. And we realized, okay, our goal is to reflect the experience we had with the group, and the group was talking about at one point, what is a monument? What is the definition of a monument, the role of a monument? How can we kind of commemorate this experience we've had? There was a desire to reflect the experience we had as a group in a physical object. So, okay, that's our goal. And what are the basic shapes that we keep coming back to when we do work together? And it kept coming back to the circle. And the fact that every time we would begin or end an activity, we'd circle up in this, it's a natural sort of democratic shape. Nobody has more of a voice than another person. And we just realized, okay, there's a shape. We want to collaborate with the park as well, with nature. And we have to somehow incorporate time into this. So all these things came together to make us decide on this simple, sort of fleeting moment that you can experience however you want to experience it in this sculpture, using circles and using the sun and the movement of the earth.
We have to ask a question or two.
Sure.
Yes.
We have time for one or two questions if anyone has anything that they'd like to ask.
Not all at once. Yeah, and that's a really good question. The short answer is that it doesn't matter whether it's overcast, doesn't matter whether it's sunny, doesn't matter whether the shadows are really aligned or not, necessarily to experience the piece and to have, to connect with it visually, potentially emotionally as well. But the idea that, we came together as a group, and the only the work that we did with the group is non-object based. There's no physical object that came out of it. There's just the experience that comes and goes. It's very fleeting. It's something you can't hold on to. You can't try and grip it. You can't try and pin it down. And the same is true with that alignment. It's significant when the shadows align, but it's not something you want to hold on to so tightly that it precludes any enjoyment or receptiveness to any other of the days of the year when this happens. It's an acceptance of the significance of that moment, and also an embracing of the 365 days where this piece, shadows or not, aligned or not, has the potential to offer you an experience and offer you a connection with something that is either aesthetically or has an aesthetically meaningful or has a narrative that you connect with as well. So I hope that answers the question.
And now it's time for the next person to come up. Milton, you're going to have to wait.
Thanks again to Taipei and Lisa Freiman. It is now my pleasure to introduce my wife, Sarah Urist Green, who is an associate curator here at the IMA, who developed the installations helped develop the installations by Andrea van Lieshout, Joep van and Thea Makipa for 100 Acres, and she is going to come on stage, and she would be introducing Thea Makipa if Thea and Makipa were not 35,000 feet in the air right now. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Urist Green.
Thank you, John. Really, this was very kind of you to do. I have been incredibly lucky to work on this project, Eden 2 by Thea Makipa, and it would not have happened if not for Rebecca Uchill, our former curator, who initiated this project with Thea. Thea came to us with a story, and we helped her realize that story here at the museum. So while Thea is away, two of the people who were instrumental in bringing this project to life will be joining me on stage. But before we do that, I would like to show you a short clip that will introduce you to Thea, who wishes she could be here.
My name is Thea Makipa, and this is my work, Eden 2, in progress. Eden 2 is actually a big ship. It's like a refugee ship, and at the same time like Noah's Ark, which is so full of people that all animals have been eaten away. It's inspired by global warming and its expected effects, like mass movements of people. It's mostly steel and plexiglass, partly recycled, partly new.
The initial plan was to have some electronic components like flat screen TVs and audio on the ship. It has morphed into having an element based on the shore, like a guard shack.
Nature itself. This is the endlessly interesting issue for me, and I'm endlessly curious to find out the different dynamics of nature and human being in it.
So joining me on stage will be Brad Dilger, who's a multimedia designer here at the museum, and Brose Partington, who's our mount maker. Both are also artists and worked very closely on this project. Is this on? It is, okay. So as I was explaining earlier, Thea really came to us with a story, a narrative, that was about this strange sight appearing in the lake at 100 Acres that was mysterious and was something that was foreboding, and you were eventually supposed to realize that there were people aboard the ship. And the process started with Thea imagining that she could procure a ship in Europe and sail it across the ocean and through the waterways of the US and somehow make it to the White River and make it across the breach into our lake. And that's where the ship would reside. And this is connected to a lot of the ideas behind Thea's work, because her work explores in depth, as she alluded to in the video, the effects of climate change and rising sea levels. So part of that project would be a way to get her here in an ecologically non-impactful way. And that idea couldn't work for several reasons. There was risk, there was budget concerns, which wouldn't have even gotten her very far from Europe. But so we sort of set out to help her realize this story and to realize this narrative here. And we started to look for a whole ship here to put in the lake, and then we realized that we didn't need a whole ship. We needed something that looked like a ship, and we didn't need an engine. And so we sort of started talking to Taya and working with Taya about how we could make this a reality. So I'm hoping, Brad, you can share with us sort of the beginning of the building of this project.
Well, I have to mention another person, Mike Burr, who is an integral part of this process as well. You'll get to hear from Mike later on a different project, but I'll actually defer to Brose on this. He was going to...
Yeah, I'll start at the beginning.
Sorry,
of the project.
Brose,
I was more involved in the beginning than the end, but what came about, and I didn't know much about the project at first, and I don't know if anybody really did, since the curators, but we needed a place to build this boat, or this structure, and it was first going to be built in the meadow in the summertime. So we were fortunate enough to have Heron School of Art and Design's sculpture facility, which we're both familiar with. We went to school there, and so we started the fabrication process at Heron, and we started over there, and Mike Burr and Haldor, which is Taya's assistant, were kind of like our liaison between Taya and the engineers, and feeding us information and designs, and we were kind of playing it by ear and going by then. But there were several factors we kept in mind while building the ship, and one, of course, was Taya's vision, and as an artist, her vision was changing, so we moved around that. You know, we built the boat to her vision. I think things were changing every day on the process. Another big part of this boat was it had to come apart. It had to be in pieces. So eventually, maybe like in 2 or 3 or 4 years, this could be shipped back to Germany or somewhere else.
Right. Taya really likes the idea of this ship existing somewhere else, maybe even in the desert or in another sort of anomalous, strange place. So
ironic enough, we put it in a shipping container, which is a 10 by 20 container. So the ship's actually in 2 parts. The bow and the stern, and it all comes apart, and we had to keep in mind all the separate parts, so everything's bolted together. And then the other factor was the engineering factor. This thing had to float, one way or another. We had to get it out there. We had to lift it by crane into the water, and it had to sit there and float. But as far as the start of our process, we started with the bends, or the ribs of the boat, which I think there's 23 bends that are about 2 feet apart, which make the boat, I think the total ship is about 48 feet. And then that was attached to a spine, which was a 10 by 10 steel spine that was in 2 parts, a structure, of steel that was heavy gauge enough for us to lift. And then there were stringers that were attached each of the bends that gave us a place to attach the sheet to, the galvanized sheeting. And then we fabricated the cabin, the top part of the boat, the antenna, I think some of the students designed some of the guns on it.
We had some great students from Heron who designed some guns for us. For
yeah,
the ship.
And so then we, once we were finished, we had 2 weeks to finish this project at Heron. I think we were under a deadline there because they had school starting. We had to take it all apart and put it on 2 flatbed trucks, and we transported it to the meadow where the steel galvanized sheet was then put on, and then it was painted. I think Tia came back for the painting of it for that process, and I think you can take it from there, Brad.
Well, one thing I'd like to add is that Taya's original idea for this, sort of the seed of it started when she was in Iran on her way to the Sharjah Biennial, where she was, her journey to the Sharjah Biennial was actually her project, because she traveled from Germany to Sharjah entirely by train or boat and not flying. So when she was in Iran, she saw on the coastline a very mysterious ship that was a huge industrial vessel that was decaying and in terrible shape, and this kind of strange, mysterious, foreboding presence was what made her think about the project here. So what was important to her in this process of constructing the ship is that it look as large as possible from the shore. So the dimensions of the ship are actually exaggerated in the front to make it look larger from shore. But Brad, I'm hoping you can sort of take over this story of how this project was realized from the point that it was completed on shore.
Sure. Again, Mike, if I forget anything, feel free to let us know. So at this point, we have a ship, sort of a fake ship, sitting in the meadow that's about 47 feet, about 7 feet wide, and then about 29, actually it's 18 feet high. So we had to move this ship that was at this point weighing close to 10,000 pounds from the meadow in the park to the shoreline to get it in the water. So we actually had to use two different cranes, one that could support the weight of the ship and move it to a second crane which was going to support that weight and another 10,000 pounds and lift a total of 20,000 pounds 115 feet into the water. So it was quite the process to get it from the meadow to the lake, and then even getting it in the lake, we had to move it probably.
Well, and Brad's going to be modest here, but once the ship was in the water, Brad actually suited up in a dry suit and with his scuba diving skills connected the anchors to the ship's keel underneath the water. So we were very grateful that Brad had these unknown skills.
Yeah, unknown to me whenever I started working at the IMA. I never realized I would be doing any scuba diving work, but it came in handy. But yeah, so we moved the ship from where we dropped it in the, well, not dropped it, but placed it in the water. Yeah. Moved it probably, 1,000 feet or so to its current location. Then.
And once the ship was in the water, we had the task of developing the narrative and connecting it to the shore. So initially, Taya had wanted to include LCD screens on the ship from the windows to reflect that there were people on board, but we all realized that you weren't going to be able to see anything from shore, and so we developed a guard shack. Oh, I see the music. Anyway, there's a lot more to the story, and Taya will be here this evening, so I hope you'll all come to the party and meet her and talk to her about her project.
And there are many images on imamuseum.org that sort of follow this process. It's great to check out that as well.
So I don't think we can take any questions, but ask me later.
Yeah, we are not afraid to play you off. I should mention here that the great music that's playing us off is from DJ Epstein. So thank you for being here and keeping us tight. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jennifer Mikulay, who is, I'm proud to say, a friend of mine, but also a specialist in contemporary public art and visual culture, who since 2007 has been on the faculty of the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, or as we know it here in Indianapolis, IUPUI. So here, without any further ado, please help me in welcoming Jenny Mikulay.
Thanks, John. It's really nice to be here, and I think before proceeding any further, we already heard a little bit about the connection between the Heron School of Art and Design, where I've been appointed, and the IMA, and I just want to thank Lisa Freiman and your colleagues at the IMA, and especially in the Contemporary Department, for being so generous with including our students at Heron so frequently with really, really great projects here. It's really wonderful. So I had the opportunity this year to work on one of these projects with Andrea Zittel and some of our students, and to introduce that, we're going to look at a video here.
This particular island is made out of foam covered with fiberglass.
It just melts right through this stuff,
Let's take a big long one.
I'm intrinsically interested in structures, ways that people live. So I think that I would want to either be an architect, a psychologist, or, like maybe do body work or something. Like either building things for people to live in or figuring out ways of healing people.
Okay, Andrea Zittel and Jessica Dunn, do you want to come up here and chat? So there's been, those of you here in Indianapolis have probably seen a lot of really great local media coverage of this project, so it doesn't need a whole lot of introduction, but Andrea made the sculpture, the island, and then Jessica Dunn and another Heron student, Mike Runge, are going to be living in it for 6 weeks this summer and had to outfit it and kind of get it ready for habitation. So it's been a really interesting collaboration that involves the intimacy of a domestic space, but also the structure of an academic school project and a collaboration that has been conducted primarily via email and telephone. And so I wanted to hear a little bit from each of you, and if you could share what the collaboration has been like.
Sorry, this is like, I was kind of freaked out by the video.
We're just talking right
now. Well, I mean, we've emailed a few times, and I met you briefly when I came here and did a presentation for the Heron. And then we read all of the proposals, and your proposal was really amazing. And it was actually the first one I read, and I was like, oh my God, if they're all this good, we're going to be like totally screwed because we'll never be able to choose one. And then I read them, and it really was like until the end, it just kind of stayed in my head. And one of the things that I do in my work a lot is I create something and then hand it off. And I think it's challenging to to not control that too much. And so, I think we've spoken a little bit, but we actually have not spoken that much. And I think that you guys have just kind of taken it and run, and it's been really exciting watching the blog and, seeing everything develop.
It's interesting how multidimensional it is as a collaboration. And I'm thankful, like, when we read the proposal, or the request for proposals, I was so happy to have the opportunity to work with an artist inspiring to me and what I'm interested in doing. So it was interesting, Mike and I collaborating on the project as well, and then collaborating with Andrea, which we only spoke through email mostly.
Right. And so, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting about what you're doing is that one of the problems I've had with my work is that I make these structures for living in, but I'm inherently a very private person, and when there's a lot of people around, I tend to melt down. And one thing I really appreciate is that I feel that you're really good communicators, and you have this really wonderful voice in the blog, and I feel like you're very comfortable with people, and I have a generosity that's going to allow people to kind of experience the island in a way that's very intimate, but very direct. I think it's going to be a lot more interesting for people to experience it through you rather than just looking at this sort of remnant of something that somebody used once and trying to imagine what that was like.
Yeah, we're really excited to collaborate with the people, our guests as well. As Andrea and collaborating with Mike, all of these visitors have an opportunity to kind of collaborate with us as well through the island trade, which is a kind of ever-changing thing, and with the messages that we will be posting on the blog. So there's so many different levels of collaboration and communication. So it's been really exciting.
Somebody said they traded yesterday, so are you already up and running?
Yeah, we are up and running for trade.
Yeah.
just following on this, the island itself is fairly minimalistic in the amenities that are available, and part of your challenge was to figure out what you needed in order to make it a comfortable place to live. And I think that when you were making it, you had to think somewhat like, what are the very bare things that people would need in order to actually be able to live here? So I was wondering if you could share a little bit of your thinking about how you decide what you need versus what you don't need.
I mean, when we were building it, we figured, well, somebody would need a bed, and they'd need probably a table and a chair. And there's a kitchen that's built in because I thought it would be asking a lot for somebody to have to backtrack and drill holes in it and try and figure out some of the basic mechanics. And there's a place for a porta potty on it. But, you know, I think that we never really told you where any of those places would be. So I'm really interested to see if the way that you interpreted it was the same way that I imagined that some of those places would be.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it as well. And I was just traveling in Europe, and that's kind of an inspiration for the way you can live minimally, because they are very efficient over there, and their perception of space is much different than our own. And I used to be very, I'd collect a lot of things and have a lot of bulk stuff, but this project is helping me kind of rethink my use of space. And
yeah, you have to row everything out in the boat, right?
yeah, we had to row all of the furniture out in the boat, which was kind of tricky. It's heavy and kind of bulky and awkward to fit through, but now that it's in the island, I think it's pretty appropriate.
Right.
Okay, well, let's see what questions the audience has about this project. Yes, sir.
Well, we're allowed to use the showers and facilities at the IMA, but
So no showering is on the island.
Yeah.
It's in the building here.
You could, though, if you decided to. I mean, you could do like a solar shower. I think that would probably work.
All right. Question here in the back.
Well, luckily, yeah, in Europe, we got to get used to separating all the trash with papers and plastic bottles and all of that stuff. So I'd like to incorporate what I learned there in kind of taking care of the waste and being really green about it and recycling and make sure it gets in the proper place.
Are you going to use a porta potty?
I think so. When we need to.
Yeah.
We'll try to make it to the visitors pavilion, but there's no guarantee that'll always happen.
It's funny, like these are always the most interesting questions. They're like, what do you do with your poop?
I see a question here, yes?
Luckily, since it's a white structure, it's not bringing in a whole lot of sunlight, and it's also fairly well insulated. So the lake water is kind of cool, and it pretty much stays a little bit cool in there. And there's
Yeah, you haven't been on it. It hasn't gotten that hot yet, but when we were designing it too, there's a porthole that opens up, and we were imagining that that would work as kind of as a wind scoop or a wind funnel to pull the air through.
All the way at the back.
Living in the desert, I think a lot about how geographical features really affect the way that people live. And so I've thought a lot about as the island as somehow being representative of two major factors of contemporary life, which have to do with autonomy and individualization. So I know I'm getting more at a cultural reference rather than a spatial reference. I mean, in my mind, I think those two are inextricably entwined, and I do feel that they come together. But, you know, obviously there's two components to that.
And I think space is a major issue for the art project that Jessica and her collaborator Mike are activating with the piece is you know, having to create a set of activities and formal requirements and just sustenance within this small, very specific kind of space that also has to interact with the broader park.
And Mike and I were considering space as, you know, art as life as well as an experiential thing, and how our visitors will interpret the space that we live in as well.
But I also, I mean, a big component of it too is this kind of isolation and connection with the shore. Well, and we just had a whole conversation about where you had to move it further out because you felt like you were vulnerable because you were too close to shore. So like these other factors of space play into it too.
Thanks.
Я
Hein, unfortunately, could not be here this weekend, and I was disappointed about that, not only because he has this fantastic project in the park, which is Bench Around the Lake, but he also has an exhibition in our McCormick Forefront galleries. So he conceived of both of these projects in concert with each other. So in our galleries, we have a piece that's actually a roller coaster for a series of white plastic balls, and it's motion activated. So when you enter the gallery, a ball is released and sets on a course throughout the entire gallery space and somewhat into our permanent collection space. So that work, as with the work outside, is a way to get you to move around the gallery and to move around a park in two different ways and in a less predictable way than usual. And we will now see a short clip of Jeppe talking about his work here at the museum.
My name is Jeppe Hein. I'm from Denmark. I will do a project which is called Bench Around the Lake. These projects around here in the park are quite, how to say, local. They're not spreading out on the whole park. And I was working with Sarah a lot, the curator, Sarah Green, to try to expand and to have experience and to have people to actually walk around the lake, because it's not so obvious that you should walk around this area. So make a bench which is going into the earth, and in your mind going through the earth and coming up over there again. So it's always connected, so it's always coming from the earth up and down again. And then it has looping, it has like slides, it has different social attachments to it. Some are more playful, some are more theoretical, some are more boring, some are more just normal. And right over there, we were going to have a kissing bench. I also invited to do a quite big project in the gallery, which is calling Distance. And in there we're installing a big roller coaster, which is like balls like these big white PVC balls running on a track, and every person who's coming in activating his own ball, so the ball activating in a machine, going up on a track and start to drive through the gallery and make holes in the walls, so it's going through. So you're running around as you're visiting the gallery around this kind of space, and then it's stopping after a looping, starting going up again, and this way moving around in your path. So you're ending up where you started. And a little bit like the bench around the lake here as well, is somehow about the people, how to say, the path through the museum, the path through the park. So that's kind of course, extremely a link between the two projects. 50% of the people coming here will not know that this is contemporary art, and I don't think it's important. I think it's important that maybe make a trigger or a trick that people actually really like to find out what's going on in there, because here there's all these crazy stuff. There's this fantastic building, these crazy benches. There will be an island, a white snow island out here where you can sail out. I don't know, but I think there will be a big ship is already over there. And things like that, which of course indicating that something's going on here. And I hope, and I think actually that's my experience with contemporary art in the public space, that triggers something in people, with children and not, and then like to go into the museum. And this, of course, that's education. If you have the society here, and then if you somehow turn upside down on your jacket, actually of the society, I think actually that that the contemporary art is somehow showing we are like journalists or like someone who can explain something in another way, and I think actually that contemporary art can do.
I love Jeppe. He had to have an excuse to show off his excellent biceps, and he was like, "How am I going to? Oh, I'll turn my jacket around." Jeppe signs off every email that he sends. Sving, Jeppe. We're going to hear from Dave Hunt now, who is going to introduce the next piece. Dave is the project manager for 100 Acres, and he has been since 2007. I suspect he has not slept in a couple weeks, but this is, for Dave, a particularly extraordinary day, having worked so hard for so long on 100 Acres. So here he is.
The curse of being tall. So in addition to art and nature, architecture was really the third
piece of the puzzle out in the Art and Nature Park, both in the form of the Visitors Pavilion designed by Marlon Blackwell, who's here today and I'll invite up in a minute, but also in the form of a lot of these works of art which are very architectural in not only in their forms but also in the methods that we had to use to create them. One of those pieces is certainly Kendall Buster's Stratum Pier. Unfortunately, Kendall couldn't be here today, but we do have Jeremy Olsen, who is a principal architect from Wheeler Kearns in Chicago and was the project architect for Kendall Buster's piece, but also for Alfredo Jaar's Park of Laments, and has a unique perspective on what it took to make those projects happen. So we're going to introduce a quick film clip introducing Kendall's Pier, and then after that we'll have a quick clip introducing the Visitors Pavilion by Marlon Blackwell.
This is a very unique project for us. Most of our work is housed in the traditional sort of venues of architecture. This is called Stratum Pier by the artist Kendall Buster. I assisted Kendall in terms of the actual sort of visualization of the project, in terms of picking the materials that would be used. This is fiberglass reinforced plastic. It's a nice combination of providing the lightness that the artist wanted, the fact that it sort of sits lightly on the site, but at the same time would have the durability that we would need for people to walk on this, the public to experience it, and also for it to last in some kind of tricky climactic conditions here with the water level of the lake rising and falling, etc.
Kendall is an artist who started out as a microbiologist and has always been interested in the forms that you could see in nature itself and the minute details of nature. She started this project out after visiting the site by studying our survey maps that we had done of the entire landscape. And if you look closely at a survey map, you see all of the contours of different landforms and of different heights of the land. And she took those actual organic forms and brought them into the formation of this sculpture itself.
And the most striking thing for me is the relationship between the building, the structure, and the woods. The way that the size of the columns and the way that the color fits beautifully with the trees around it. I just think that connection is really strong and remarkable.
It's a beautiful intersection of engineering and art. It's absolutely what it needs for the structure to hold it up, no more, no less, but it is also very conscious about having a relationship with these other patterns and textures that are surrounding us here in nature. It's the kind of structure that would slow people down rather than just hurrying through things like we also often do in a museum. It's kind of rush from one painting to the next. In this case, I'd like to think they could feel embraced by the building, embraced by nature, and have a willingness to occupy the in-between. The interior space is conceived to be like a piece of the museum, something highly refined, broken off from the museum, and placing itself in the woods, surrounded by this kind of rough, tough structure. I would be interested to see what that's going to induce on how people behave. You know, do they treat it like a living room, a lounge, or is it something that maybe they don't want to hang out in at all? Maybe they just want to hang out on the edges. I don't know. It remains to be seen.
I think there'll be a lot of hanging out on the edges.
Yeah.
I think it's...
Who wants to be inside, right?
Well, it's just such a nice spot from which to look around.
Yeah.
So please join me in welcoming Marlon Blackwell and Jeremy Olsen. The park, in a lot of ways, asks us to reevaluate the labels that we're putting on things, and there's so much gray area out there between architecture and art and even nature, but especially between the art projects and the architecture. So what I'm wondering from you is how have you sort of lived in that other world sometimes in this process compared to, especially for Jeremy, compared to more traditional projects that you may have worked on to live in the world of the artist, or what makes Kendall's Pier art and the Visitors Pavilion architecture?
Well, I don't know if people are familiar with a pair of projects that were done this past summer in Chicago. There was a project by the UN Studio and Zaha Hadid. They were located in Grant Park, which is Chicago's front door. I think it's kind of interesting how those projects were sculptural forms by architects, creating spaces that people would interact with that didn't really have any true function other than just to kind of make you think about how you react to spaces that get larger and smaller. I think it's interesting that the Kendall Buster piece is in many ways a piece of architecture that was done by a sculptor, and basically exploring the exact same things, where she was really interested in finding out what her normal forms are, which is basically something that you observe, or if you do experience them, they're usually in a gallery space or in a kind of confined art perspective. And now she's kind of branching out a little bit more and getting into things where people have to actually stand on them, and loads are met and safety parameters have to be met. I think that it's interesting how the two things get to cross paths over the course of a couple of years here.
It's actually interesting. The Visitors Pavilion and Kendall's Pier are maybe two of the pieces in the park that are the most site-specific. Kendall's Pier is very specifically designed for the exact location it's sitting on. And the Visitors Pavilion really can only exist in that space, and it's really the space itself in a lot of ways defined what the building could and couldn't be. What was it like, Marlon, sort of reacting to that very specific location?
Well, this was when we initially came upon this site. It's a very wet and sort of fecund area, and there's no real view. So it wasn't so much about setting up views, but instead sort of translating the canopy and the ground and letting the building act as this sort of metaphorical in between. So what we kept finding out there were leaves that had been eaten away by insects and had a great deal of porosity, and so we used that as an analog to the canopy of the trees with the porosity there. So the idea was to imagine something that would allow light and water to pour through it. And so the building responds, I think, in that way, in a sort of biological way, and then at the same time has to sort of allow itself to operate between the canopy and the ground by sort of levitating. So we sort of see this as a type of apparition in the woods.
I think it's interesting that you and Kendall both reacted to the site in a way that led to a structure that was porous, that allowed the natural surroundings to sort of infiltrate the piece.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you both sort of arrived at that conclusion independently.
Yeah. Well, so much of art and architecture is transformative acts. You're translating what's nature made into what's man-made. So it requires you to be very attentive to that. And the biggest challenge as an architect, responding to this idea of the art, was to not let architecture get in the way. All those things that make buildings, that you have to have, door handles and restrooms and all of those things, and how to begin to deal with that as an experience that's more aesthetic, right, than functional. So
it's interesting watching people react to that. The Visitors Pavilion does not have door handles on any of the doors that you push, and it's been a very interesting social experiment watching people try to wrap their heads around these doors without handles.
Yeah. It'll become a destination. They'll get it. Figure out how to get into the rest. And the great thing is, if you can't get in the restrooms, you have nature around you. So.
I think one of the neat things in talking about how a site is transformed by the architecture, this is actually maybe something that not everybody knows, but this is in fact a transformed site. It used to be a limestone quarry where the lake is now that has filled up with rainwater and river water over time. So it's fun for me to think about, and very instructive for me to think about how the site is probably in itself the biggest intervention that First Nature has already been attacked in a way with the limestone quarry, and how nature sort of reclaims its own eventually. And we think about these small interventions, and that quarry is quite a big intervention. And here it is already hardly apparent that that's what was there.
I think we should take some questions. I'm sure there are quite a few questions for both Jeremy and Marlon.
Through the structure, except where it's actually air conditioned and heated, and we have skylights over that. So the lighting quality is the same inside as it is outside. But no, clearly we don't want leaks through the building in that way. But conversely, when it floods, the water will be allowed to kind of move up through the deck as well, through the floor. Yeah, but not on the interior, because what we built there is a plenum. Instead of having ducts, the whole floor is a duct, which takes the geothermal air and then pumps it into the space.
The interior space of the building is really sort of a suspended cube,
Yeah.
which is weather tight, but that cube sits in a deck and canopy system that are porous.
It's only 1,100 square feet out of about 5,000 square feet of surface. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, that's a good question. I think our strategy was to, again, looking at the leaf as both structure and surface, and how to take that idea of one material, one detail, and allow it to work as a horizontal datum, a vertical datum, and then another horizontal datum as the canopy, which would then frame this beautiful glass jewel box, in the woods, and has that kind of refinement that you might find here in the museum, but now sitting as a type of lounge or respite in the woods. So that idea of framing was one, and then just the way that in the surface itself, creating variations, oculi, in which you can actually view the trees through the framed structure and view the ground as well. It's literal interpretations.
O meu coração é o sol, pai de toda cor. Quando ele lhe doura a pele ao léu.
Introduce to you Ed Blake, who couldn't be with us here today. He had a pretty serious surgery this week, and I talked to him on Wednesday. He's doing really well. They're letting him out of the hospital today, and he couldn't be with us, but we have a video clip. Ed really was the spiritual leader of our design team, and he, along with us, and of course with Hagerman and Dave and everybody, it was just, he really exhibited great leadership. And the way he sees the land is, he starts in the Pleistocene era. I mean, he goes way back and then works you right up to the present, and really helps you understand those relationships with things that are nature-made and the things that are man-made. And I really wish he could be here today. He talks like Faulkner writes. He's from Mississippi. He dresses like Keith Richards. And, he's just the kind of guy that when he's in a room, he really fills it up because he's 6'8". That's another aspect of him. But in any event, hopefully this will give you some insight into Ed's thoughts, and we just want him to get well soon. Thank you.
Rather than bringing in an idea of remaking a place in the landscape, this is more about in the park teasing out the finer qualities so that it reveals itself. Humans can put their hands and shape things in a way that doesn't get in front of, but really brings out the essence. I call it a Zen-like quality.
So I also have the pleasure of introducing Los Carpinteros Free Basket. It's if the Visitors Pavilion is sort of the destination in the park, Free Basket is really the front door to the park. You can't miss it, and it's very much sort of the bridge to the community outside of the perimeter of the park. I think we're going to see a quick clip of Dago and Marco discussing their project.
Dago Rodríguez and Marco Quintana.
No,
Marco Castillo.
Los Carpinteros.
Free basket. We are using this basket court, and we are putting to jump the place where you supposed to put the ball.
The basket and the basket base start bouncing all over around the court as it would be the game, a real game. So at the end, it's going to create a sculptorical sensation of a game, and also at the same time architectural,
because when all these arches come together, create almost like an architectural structure.
Like a roof, and you can come below.
We were talking about that the other day. And
I was be a drum player for sure. Very good.
I think I would be a long jumper.
What?
How do you say that in English? Long jumper.
A long jumper.
Yes.
Where you get
that? Was
that?
Good. Of course, I'm too old for being in competition, but if I wouldn't be an artist, I think we would try to jump very long.
Do you want to demonstrate?
Now?
Yeah.
On site, the point person for the creation, the physical creation of this piece was Mike Burr, the exhibition designer here at the IMA, and he's going to join us on stage also. Unfortunately, Marco couldn't be with us, but at the IMA, the glass is always half full, and we do have Dago Rodriguez here, and please help me welcome Dago and Mike Burr. With Marco also, we were driving around Indianapolis, the suburbs, sneaking into people's backyards to take a look at their basketball courts, to scope out plastic tiles for Free Basket. And Mike and I were talking the other day about this, the fact we both remember a point during those car rides when you and Marco were going back and forth trying to name a piece that you had done in a different gallery that you were getting ready to open. Do you remember the two of you sort of brainstorming the name for this piece?
The piece is no. It was a name for a show, a whole show.
Oh, okay.
It was Conga Muerta or Rumba Muerta, something like that.
Well, here's what was going on. I'm driving. This is my story. I'm sticking to it. We're driving down the street, and these two are one in the front and one in the back. Dave is also in the back, and I hear salsa, and the other one, muerte, salsa, muerte. And they go back and forth like this. And Dave and I were trying to figure out what's going on. And then they finally confessed that they were looking for the title of this. We thought it was for a piece, but for a show.
It was for a show, but also it's the name of one of the pieces. But at the end, we didn't choose no one of those names.
Yeah. Well, but it was interesting to watch the two of you communicate back and forth.
A lot and nothing happens. You know, barking, but nothing happens.
But it was.
Well, so did this provoke, or was it a similar method of you naming Free Basket?
Kind of, yeah. But the free basket started with a small drawing. This small drawing was about two opposite situations that were coming closer and closer, no?
Yeah.
And we choose basket because this is impossible to do it with cricket or another kind of game, you know? And the basket gave us the possibility to how do you say, to make a picture of this in joint of.
Yeah, I don't think a cricket pitch would have had quite the same effect that Free Basket has. Communication, both between the two of them, but especially communication between Los Carpinteros and the IMA was a major player in the process of creating this piece. They were in Cuba the entire time except for one visit when they were finally able to come. And it was always an adventure. Even talking to them on the phone, it was like they were on another planet. There was like a 10-second delay every time we talked back and forth. Aside from the language barrier, there was this delay, and I would be talking to Marco or Dago, and I would stop. He would stop. You probably experience it on a cell phone a little bit, but it's a really bizarre thing when there's that much of a spread. Then finally, there was a time when you've been in Spain for the last month or two.
Yeah, the last time we were in Spain, and I think the communication with Spain is better. I don't know what happened with Cuba, that anytime you call, you have to wait like 2-3 seconds that they last forever. Yeah. And then the other guy say, hey, yes, whatever.
So we're trying to determine court colors, basketball, the arc colors.
The colors was very difficult part because the examples we get there were not.
We're trying to communicate in Pantone, as you may know, that there are lists of colors that we can communicate with across the whole world. Everyone understands what a Pantone color is, but we're using tonemic paints, a kind of architectural paint, and we want to be sure that these things are going to work in agreement between the museum and the artists. So finally, we're sending samples. I'm trying to communicate, say, Benjamin Moore, do you speak Benjamin Moore? Do you speak Sherwin-Williams? So, so finally, we're sending samples that way, and at one point, Marco was in New York, picked up samples.
It would be impossible if Marco, thanks God, Marco was in New York, and you sent the samples with the real paint, because otherwise it would be impossible to do it. Because anytime we choose a color was like too dark or too, I don't know.
Well, finally,
too pink.
Kind of, at the end, David suggested, I think it was Dave's suggestion that we actually illuminate this from below, and that was a great suggestion. It truly makes it such a presence from 38th Street, and with that consideration to have color, the color had to be able to work with lighting.
I can't wait to see. I didn't see the piece yet. I can't wait to see it. I want to see it today.
Sorry, Dago, is this piece the longest distance that you've been from the physical object as it's being created? Is this the first time you've created a work of art from such a long distance that it has sort of evolved without you physically touching it and feeling it and being there?
Yeah, the last 2-3 years we have been producing things by email, and this is no, you know, it's complicated. When you see the piece at the end, you get surprised, and it's crazy. But this piece, what I like is you guys were like you will study every single detail. I never worked with somebody with so many details. This rock had to be there or there. We were totally impressed about that, and I think it was great.
Mike Burr is a detail fanatic, and he contributed a sort of a micro attention to detail to a lot of the pieces, but especially Free Basket. And I think it's a piece that's interesting because there are two very different experiences in either seeing it from a distance, seeing it from the street above, or being down on top of that chord and actually touching it and feeling it and being literally on top of it. I think it was really Mike who was able to see both of those simultaneously, both of those experiences simultaneously.
Excuse me, the setting of that. Actually, one of the earlier ideas you had were what, 3 planters, or a planter with 3 trees in it? Do you recall that?
Yeah. We went through 3 different projects, but they were not.
Actually, we were all excited about that at the get-go. But then finally, as we're thinking more about it, we're thinking about this view from 38th Street, and the apparent, looking down on that, the planter diminishes. It changes scale. It doesn't work anymore. So. This works far better. This is
no. This is but what I liked was at the beginning we were not so ambitious to do so many bouncings. We were planning to do only like 3 or 4, and this is that was a great surprise also.
Great.
Do we have any questions for Dago or Mike?
The red and blue, because we were, this is a play of opposites, so we need to mark each one with a different colors. It's just you can distinguish, the both.
Is there a special meaning for why red and why blue? As why those 2 specific colors?
No. It's just to make different differences.
It's been very interesting to watch other people apply their own meanings to the red and the blue.
Yeah, great.
Anybody else? Yes.
Very important. Also, every single school, secondary school, have a basketball court. In the past, in the 70s, we used to have a great team in Cuba, a basket team. But I don't know what happened. Lately, I don't know. It's not popular anymore in the government levels. But in the popular level, this is some, and I mean, the people love it.
Everybody wants to be a long jumper instead now.
What?
Everybody wants to be a long jumper instead of a basketball player.
Or at least one person does.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of that color came from the court being reflected onto it. So at sometimes it's red and sometimes it's kind of orange.
I think it changed at night. Well,
Yeah.
probably will change during the day, no? The colors.
In fact, originally their idea was that it be a square tube bouncing through, and it was one of the Hageman guys, I think, that suggested, well, because just the difficulty of bending that without ridges and so forth, it was easier to bend the round tubing.
Yeah, we wanted to make it a little bit
more like a basketball.
The music in Marlon's head is asking us to leave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Uchill, who is currently a PhD student in the History, Theory, and Criticism of Art in the Department of Architecture at MIT, but was once upon a time the Associate Curator of Contemporary Art here at the IMA. She initiated several of the projects in the park, including Funky Bones by Joep van Lieshout, which she'll be talking about with Joep van Lieshout today. So here's Rebecca Uchill. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thanks, John. Joep van Lieshout is a prolific artist and designer. With his Atelier van Lieshout, he has exhibited, lectured, and designed internationally, receiving due accolades, including the Kurt Schwitter's Prize for Contemporary Artwork of ongoing importance. Van Lieshout's work ranges from outrageous symbols of hypermasculinity, taking form in his oversized phallic sculptures, to his nihilistic designed spaces for debauchery, to his political advocacy for autonomy, as with the fully operational anarchistic Free State he founded in front of his Rotterdam studio in the year 2000. For 100 Acres, Van Lieshout designed a series of benches in the shape of an oversized skeleton, referring to the idea of unearthing bones of past civilizations. In his proposal, he wrote, quote, "As a child, I knew the state Indiana and Indianapolis as an exotic place where Indians came from. And even though this is not true, it is important for my proposition." He continues, "The funky bone benches installed in the park symbolize the leftovers of this old culture and the spread of Native Americans over the continent. The benches are now places for people to sit, gather, climb, reflect on today's culture, and indeed, as well as cultures that came before." We're going to watch a short introduction of Funky Bones, introduced by curator Sarah Urist Green, with assistance from the irresistible Henry Green.
We're outside at 100 Acres today to install Atelier van Lieshout's Funky Bone benches. And I'm here today with Henry Green, who's helping us install. These are made out of fiberglass, and they will be put into the ground with cement foundations and then pins that hold them in. So they'll be out here all year. So it's kind of a puzzle game right now, and made more difficult when we can't view it from overhead. So we're gonna figure out if we're just gonna have the skeleton arms akimbo or spread out and see how it'll be best arranged in the park. So I think it'll be a really nice view as you're walking in from the park, and you'll see this gathering of white forms that won't really make sense. And then as you cross the meadow, you'll start to understand that it's a skeleton. And so visitors to the park will be invited to come and sit on these bones and play on them, jump from bone to bone. I think it'll be a great interactive installation for the park. And maybe someday this guy can play on them too.
Joep van Lieshout. So actually, could we go to the first of the slides that I brought? Yeah. Joep, you've produced many designs after the human body, such as the ones we're looking at on the screen here, as well as the bar rectum, which I think was installed in the Vienna Museumsquartier this past spring. Clearly, Funky Bones also takes a bodily form. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about why you're interested in the human body as a design prompt.
Yeah, to me, I'm very much as a sculptor, because that's my background. I'm very much interested in the human body, and actually especially on the inside of the human body, because that's the part that we don't know so well, and even the scientists don't know so well why we look like we do and how the organs actually do function. So I'm very much interested in this aspect. On the other hand, I mean, those organs are very complicated machines. And so you immediately start wondering, you know, why are they made like this? Are they designed, or is this a coincidence? So you basically immediately come to a point that you can ask the question, where do we come from and where do we go? And so to me, also, since I'm interested in these organs, I also wanted to give them a certain function, like housing or bars or something like that. And to me that's interesting because it also makes a statement about design. So it's not really art follows function. It's not related to contemporary conceptual ideas about architecture. But I just take a shape that I really like, enlarge it, and then in a certain way I just fit in the function.
Thanks. I think I have one other slide that I wanted to show. In other of your museum engagements, you've provided services and spaces for museums. You have the Bonafountain cart, which I believe escorted people around museums with a bottle of champagne and lifted people up to see the art more closely. And then this is clip-on from a museum in Utrecht, yeah, with where the director's office received a special sleeping space in this kind of clip-on architecture. As well as I'd like to add the space that you built in the Daras collection in Zurich with a bed and a bunker under a staircase, which was your response to the fact that there was no space for love in the museum collection. I wonder if you could describe the process that brought you to propose these benches for this museum.
Okay. Well, you forgot to mention the large penis which was penetrating the museum in Rotterdam that functions as a toilet.
Can't mention everything.
So here, when I was visiting the park, I was astonished by, by the wildness and the beauty of the park, which really stroked me. Especially if you come from the airport, you see a lot of, let's say, American civilization, and also it's a bend in the river. And this would usually also be like a place where, you know, people would settle in prehistoric times. And so to me it was a very, how to say, real landscape that was landscape before civilization came. So that's why I was thinking about fossils, remains, things you can bury and things you can dig up. So that's why I came up with the bones. And the other thing, of course, is that such a beautiful park needs a place to sit and to lie. So
that's what I recall. Yeah. Actually, maybe we could look back at the bones again, that you saw some fishermen, right, who were in need of a place to sit and rest.
Yeah, also myself was in need for resting when I was walking in the park.
I wonder if anyone has any questions from the audience? Because if not, I have another question of my own. Oh, is there one? Oh, yes, way in the back, yeah.
Yeah, no, to me, I think for art, I really like when it's being used, and I also like it very much when it's being used by everyone, not only art lovers, but I think the position of art should be right in the middle of society, and how more people jump on it, the better.
Would anyone from events at the IMA like to respond to that? You know, the park is open to the public for free from dawn to dusk, so I can only imagine what kinds of Halloween festivities will be both encouraged by the museum and also dreamt of by the audience. Then I actually think I have one final question for you, Joep. In your 2007 Tate Talking Art lecture series, I think that you mentioned that you thought of design as your palette for creating art. And I guess I wonder, we sort of touched on this a little in the first two slides, how you distinguish your design and your art practice, and also how you see these things sort of informing each other.
Yeah, when I started making art, which is about 25 years ago, I always was very much interested in the function. And actually, all my artworks were functional or related to a function, or I expressed ideas that I had with my art through design, or through design styles. Basically, you could say design styles or ideas were like paint for a painter to me. And that always has been like that to me. I'm a very visual communicator. So to me, it's a very, yeah.
Well, the piece certainly has great visual impact. Oh, one last question, I think.
Well, if I wouldn't have been an artist, I would probably have been a doctor.
Funny thing. Did you plant that question?
No, probably I would really like to, I don't think I would be a good doctor because I really would like to experiment a lot, so.
I think we leave it there. Thank you, Joep van Lieshout, everyone.
And now we're going to have Lise Freiman, the aforementioned director of the 100 Acres Park, come up to introduce Chad Franer and Alfredo Jaar to talk about Alfredo's astonishingly brilliant and beautiful Park of the Laments. So, Lisa? Oh, and please join me in welcoming Lisa. You have to clap for her. Thank you.
When we were at the beginning of thinking about the range of artists who we wanted to participate in the park, Alfredo Jaar came to mind immediately. He just appeared really in front of me, and I've respected and loved his work for a very long time, and I knew that he hadn't done a long-term public intervention in the United States. And I knew that if Alfredo was involved here at the IMA, that he would add a degree of seriousness and thoughtfulness and deep engagement, regardless of what he would choose to do. And it became, once we invited Alfredo out and he agreed to collaborate with us, it became this funny sort of experience, because all of the other artists who we'd been working with were completely transparent about what they were thinking about and their ideas and what they might want to do. And every time Alfredo came out, he would come out in his black clothes, and he'd be very quiet, much like he is right now, with his hand on his face, and he'd be thinking very seriously. And I was trying to develop my relationship with Alfredo because we had just really met each other, and I was also trying to respect his creative process, but I started getting worried after a few visits. He still wouldn't tell me what he was thinking about doing, and I kept saying, "Can you tell me now?" And he'd say, "No, not yet." And I said, "I trust you completely. I know that this is going to be an amazing project, but can you tell me now?" No. So Alfredo really was the last, his proposal was the last one that we received and was developed. And he came and prepared with two completely fully realized conceptual plans that were completely different. And he said, "I want to present these to you and to Max and see what you think might be best for the park." And there was one proposal, the one which we eventually chose, Park of the Laments, which was striking immediately. The other project was very good and very interesting, but this project in particular seemed to have a really important role in Alfredo's practice as an artist. As many of you know, he's someone who has explored the atrocities of the 20th and 21st century in relation to genocide and poverty and war and homelessness. And he deals with very difficult subject matter and looks at it on a regular basis and processes it. And I think we all know from looking at difficult things in the news that it can be very difficult, and he forces himself to look, and his work is about seeing, it's about noticing things that have been silenced or ignored. And this project that he wanted to develop was incredibly simple and poetic and clearly transformative for him as an artist and in his practice. And when he described it to us, he said, I need to create a place where those images are gone, where it can be peaceful and people can purge those atrocities. And he set out on a pretty extraordinary journey to figure out how to realize that vision, which included Chad Franer, who is our manager of horticulture, an extraordinary creative artist in his own right, who uses the landscape here at the IMA as his palette. And Alfredo and Chad entered into a pretty extraordinary dialogue about the landscape and how it could be brought into the project and actually help build it. The other person who I cannot fail to mention today, who has not yet been mentioned, is Larry Smallwood. I think you're in the back, Larry. Thank you, Larry. Larry is just about one of the most humble human beings I've ever known, and also the most competent and innovative in terms of problem solving. And so he's really perfect to pair with an ambitious artist and to try and figure out how to help them realize their dreams. Chad and Larry worked very, very hard with Alfredo in order to make this project happen. So we're going to hear from Chad and Alfredo in a few minutes, but first we're going to look at a clip that we did of Alfredo when he was actually walking through the the nearly finished Park of the Laments.
I think it's also a different kind of space because there is nothing in it. So that was a question I asked myself when I was working on this. Can you design a space for nothing? There's been a fascinating process to come almost every month and see it grow and grow and grow. I've enjoyed even looking at stones inside these cages. I mean, every detail is a fascinating details, and every detail communicates something. Here we are containing this, these stones into these cages, almost as if this was the horror of the 21st century, and it's contained and it is being used to create this beautiful space where we can actually forget about these things, and with time they will be covered by green, by flowers, by plants, by trees. So slowly they will disappear.
This has been a real treat for me because I can't say I've ever collaborated with a horticulturalist before, and like I was saying earlier, Chad is amazing, and when we came to him and told him about this project, you know, he already had a lot on his plate in terms of having to get the landscape ready for 100 acres. In fact, he looks very clean and dry and put together right now, but I bet none of you would realize that just a short while ago he was actually spreading mulch and putting plants in the earth. Can you talk a little bit, Chad, about sort of your first encounter with this project with Alfredo and sort of how your understanding of the piece changed as a result of the conversations that you've had over the months, and how it's been different from your traditional role here at the Indianapolis Museum of Art?
Well, I think right off the bat, I didn't get it. I'll be honest.
No, it's good.
At first, you know, when we talked about a park inside of a park, I was like, how can you get any more beautiful or to go and look at the pieces of the park? This is what I normally would do. But now, I understand it more. The idea is not to have all these vistas to the lake. The idea is more so to blend in so that you can think more internally, I think, more so than about the bigger picture of what's beautiful out there. And I think that's probably the other reason why designing this space versus the gardens, we look at it much more aesthetically pleasing as far as, well, we want to put this plant in the front, we want to wow them with this plant. The idea with the plantings here were more of to kind of blend, cover, and not be shocking to the eye or appealing to people to say, ooh, I got to have that plant. So it was more subtle, used as a backdrop or a frame instead of a wow factor.
Alfredo, can you speak a little bit about the subtlety of this project and about sort of the poetry that is underlying it structurally in terms of the choice that you made for it to be square and sort of the proportions that are carried out throughout the experience, and what it was that you were hoping to convey experientially for the visitor through those dimensions combined with the plantings themselves.
Right. The 100 acres area is very large. It's really huge. So it was very important first to reduce the scale and to make it more human. So this park of the Laments reduces the scale first. So it makes it more approachable as a human being. You're not so much overwhelmed by the park, which is 100 acres, trees and trails and lakes and so on. So by reducing the scale, you realize what you are within that big space. And as I mentioned in the video, I was trying to do nothing. I think we are overwhelmed with noise and with information, and we are drowned in a sea of consumption in our lives, and with information of all kinds. And I was looking for a breathing space, a space where we can really be with ourselves in silence. And as we know, silence doesn't exist. When John Cage was looking for silence, he went into this zero sound chamber, and he heard his heart beating. So here, you will also be with yourself, and you will realize that you're with yourself within this very simple space, which is anti-design in a way.
Can you talk, this notion of anti-design that you were going after, how that worked with the plantings? Because, as Chad was saying when we started out, typically garden displays are pretty, can get pretty baroque in terms of the color and the shapes, and a lot of horticulture is about exaggerating those sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about how you and Chad figured out the mixture of plants that you eventually used, and what you were trying to achieve with them, how they were going to interact with the form itself? Right.
We wanted the inside to be almost invisible, to disappear within the park itself, and that was Chad's miracle. He had to create something that really, once it grows, it will take a couple of years for this to happen, but it will be really part of what there is. So there is nothing new, and all the plants he chose were local plants and belong naturally to the park. But I would love you to explain more what we tried to do.
Well, really, it challenged me as well, because I don't work with Indiana natives as much. We do use some in the gardens, but not strictly, which everything in the park, we went with all Indiana native plant material. So this one was challenging for me because I didn't know the plant material as well as I do now, for sure.
How many plants are in there?
There's over 3,000. But it was kind of challenging with these gabion walls. They're so large and overpowering that we kind of developed a way to make planters in the tops of them. And we have trumpet vine and wisteria, both native, coming over them. You can't quite see them too well in this picture, but you can see them out there now. They're growing rapidly. Normally you wouldn't put these someplace close to anything that you don't want eaten by them. These are the same things you see as you go down the highway, taking over entire barns. But that's what we want here. And when I talked with Alfredo about it, I said, I know you don't want a formal setting, I said, do you want something more like a Mayan ruin? And he said, yes, that's what I want. Full coverage, kind of wild, and to blend in. So I tried to do a mixture of all grasses, trees, shrubs. And again, with maturity, all of these will vary in much more in height. Alfredo really wanted everything kind of slammed up against the walls so that there was much more space with the turf that's in there. And then it just kept developing as we went along with the benches. We decided we have to have something to cover those. And then I don't know if we have a shot of the vomitory on the interior, but that was another one. We were worried about people climbing up to the benches itself. And so we were trying to plant material that would be thick and covering, but also try to hide the backs of the benches as you were looking up out of the concrete walk space.
And so probably most of you have not experienced this yet, and hopefully you will after today's program or this evening during the opening festivities or tomorrow. But essentially how you approach this project is off of one of the central trails for the park, and you see a sort of long tunnel that is completely square, and you see light and green at the end of it. And you walk through the tunnel, and as you're walking, the gabion baskets are climbing and getting taller and completely enclosing you until you get into the concrete tunnel. And there's a really beautiful thing that happens with sound, and also with temperature, because especially the last few days, as you're walking out of the sun and into this cool place, the sound starts to get muffled and drop away. And so you're walking through this liminal space, this kind of transitional space into something else. And when you come out, you're surrounded by greenery, and the only thing that you can see is all of the plants and the sky. And it's a pretty phenomenal experience to walk through it.
I think in 2 to 3 years you'll really get a feel for it, exterior and interiorly. You will lose it completely on the exterior with the plantings, and I think it's one of those things that you don't see, and then the tunnel creeps up on you and you look down it, and I think you're automatically drawn to it. You want to go down there and see what's there.
So this is an interesting question, it's an interesting comment followed by a question, which is this notion of increasing invisibility and how it relates to your work, Alfredo, and if this was something you were thinking about overtly as you were developing the project, or was it kind of a subtext that was unconscious?
No, I was thinking about it from the beginning. As I said, we're drowned into a sea of consumption that makes us forget really what's happening around us. Right now, there are 47 conflicts around the world, and most of us don't know or don't care. And one of the projects I worked on for 6 years was the Rwandan genocide that left 1 million people killed in less than 100 days. And this happened 10 years ago. And nobody even heard about it, or if they did, nobody cared. So these things happen, they're happening all the time, and they disappear from consciousness. And so I needed to create a space where I invite people to think about these things that have disappeared, and why have they disappeared, and why didn't we care about them. And so this will become a park within the park, and will be the park of the Laments or not, but it will be a space where we'll find that space perhaps to ask ourselves, where was I when this was happening, and why didn't I do anything about this or that? How come I didn't react to this or to that? It's a space for maybe thinking about these things that should have not been invisible in an invisible space.
Do people have some questions they might like to ask? Yes.
Yeah, the original design did not include gabion baskets, and I was thrilled when the architects proposed it for different technical and budget reasons. And here I have to open a parenthesis to say that the group of professionals and human beings have worked with this project was absolutely extraordinary. And Jeremy and Chad and Dave and I'm sure I'm forgetting, and Larry just played an extraordinary role in making this possible. And it's really probably the best group ever assembled to work on a project with me, thanks to Lisa's direction. So I close the parenthesis. And so when I was offered this possibility for all these technical reasons, I obviously started investigating about the Gabion process, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. So thanks to the architects that proposed it, I think the project gained in depth. And slowly I realized that everything made sense. And so it was almost kind of destiny that it had to be with that process.
It's interesting, I think, because I think all of our roles as professionals have been stretched to amazing degrees with this project. Richard McCoy, our objects conservator, Jeremy Olsen, the architect on the project, and Chad. Chad and I have been often referring to Chad as my co-curator on this project, because he has a degree of expertise with the plantings that I would never be able to have, and it's been so crucial to the realization of the concept of the project. But I think this points to something that's really important in contemporary art that's different from a lot of other kinds of practices, is the way it's become so interdisciplinary, and the way that sculpture and architecture and installation and gardening and all of these different kinds of practices come together in a way where there are not clear boundaries or clear definitions with regard to roles. And Richard, as a conservator, has been trying to understand how to care for Alfredo Jaar's project, and it's an interesting proposition because he has to speak with Chad about it and with our grounds crew, and we certainly don't have to do that with any of the works inside of the museum. So it's presenting, I think this is a really terrific project that shows you the interdisciplinary nature of the park itself, and how it brings together sort of best practices from many, many, many different kinds of fields, and gives people an opportunity to cross over in ways that they haven't been able to before. Any more questions?
Yeah, I guess I do feel like an artist in a sense. I think all of the horticulturists on the staff do take in-depth thought about what we do and how we do it. This is definitely in a different arena than what we would do in the gardens, but all the more challenging and still fun because it's aesthetically pleasing when it's finished. I think we still get to watch it mature, which is what I really will enjoy watching with this one. The gabions will eventually be gone at some point, and the vines will maybe hold the gabions up at some point. But yes, I think in a different light, I'm sure. I didn't have as much art history as I'm sure Alfredo does, or think as in depth about some of the larger problems in the world. But I think whether you're thinking about the atrocities of the world in there, or thinking about something that's affecting your own life, at that moment, it's the space for it. So.
Any other questions about this project?
Because of the kind of work I do, I've visited probably all the important memorials and spaces around the world commemorating, let's say, tragedies. And in my professional life, I happened to, just by coincidence, this year I've just inaugurated a memorial for the victims of the Pinochet regime in Santiago. And I'm working on a memorial for the victims of the genocide in Rwanda. And so, and each one of these projects, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to in a way, break the rules of what has been done. What's common into all these memorials that I've visited around the world, and maybe you will disagree, but I think that they have something in common, which is to isolate the victims in their tragedy, in their pain, in their suffering, and to isolate the relatives of the victims. So we create these spaces for the victims, and then we come here as visitors, but it's not us. We just come in as visitors and leave. So it becomes a grave. So we are really not commemorating anything. We're just burying them in a more public way. And it's a more public kind of grave. So I wanted, in the memorial I've done in Santiago and in Kigali, to do something different, not to isolate the victims, but to integrate them in a collective narrative with the rest of us, with the living. And so it's a space for everyone. And so here, this is a space for everyone. You don't see anything. It's really an invitation for us to participate actively in thinking the world and thinking what has been and what can it be.
What has been and what can be? That might be a nice place to stop.
Well, that's a tough act to follow, and I'll do so simply by saying a couple of words about tonight and tomorrow. The evening events, there's still tickets on sale for at the entrance, and of course tomorrow afternoon at 1 p.m. the tip-off at Free Basket, which opens the park to the public. It's very hard to summarize what we've just experienced today, to have the exposure to some of the brilliant ideas, the open imagination, and the professionalism of our staff across the institution in bringing all of this together. But you've gotten a taste of it, and the hope is that as you make your way into the park today and tomorrow, you begin to feel some of what was behind all of this. And what's behind it in part is a culture at our museum that's both permissive and professional. And for artists, I hope it's been an experience of opening your imaginations, working with an institution, which is a terrible word, but a museum that's very much committed to the practice of artists from the past and present being revealed in all of their splendor and all of their complexity. And for all of us as staff, most of whom have worked on this many more hours than should be allowed by law, the expansion of their own sense of self and their own sense of commitment to our museum, I hope, has been an adventure that pays off. So for everyone who's here, everyone who's watching us today, thank you for believing in this project. Please participate in it. Wear some good shoes for outdoor weather. We're in a park outside, not in a museum. And enjoy the vitality and imagination and play and seriousness of purpose that all of this brings together in 100 acres, the Virginia Beach Fairbanks Art and Nature Park. Thank you so much.